Malutau lava mai. This is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific, Ko'au Koroi Hawkins. Coming up, Palau's president says China is targeting its tourism industry to try and get him to cut ties with Taiwan.
I think most recently in Chinese news that Palau is an unsafe place and that you shouldn't go visit.
Also, the Kiribati president retains his seat as interim election results continue to trickle into Tarawa.
I think Kiribati needs to really establish a system of having a central result tally.
And later on, we hear from senior Pacific journalists documenting some of the region's rich media history. Palau's president says China is weaponizing tourism in a bid to get the nation to sever bilateral ties with Taiwan. In one instance, Cyril Whips Jr. says Palau was excluded from a global tourism summit, and he says his country has been described as dangerous by Chinese media. Caleb Fotheringham has more.
Palau's president, Cyril Whips Jr. says he's been told by China if they ditch their ties with Taiwan, the sky is the limit.
I think at the end of the day, we have a relationship with Taiwan. And of course, that relationship is something that China has openly told us that is illegal and we should not recognize Taiwan.
The number of nations recognizing Taiwan over China is a depleting list, with Nauru being the latest country to switch alliance in January of this year. Mr. Whip says China is putting pressure on Palau to do the same by weaponizing tourism. More than half of Palau's GDP comes from tourism, and Mr. Whip says China has been reducing the number of its visitors.
I think most recently in Chinese news that Palau is an unsafe place and that you shouldn't go visit. That was early on this summer.
Palau was also unable to attend the Pacific Asia Travel Association's annual summit hosted in Macau earlier this year because it doesn't have diplomatic relations with China. Mr. Whip says Taiwan has since increased the number of flights to support Palau's tourism industry.
We need economic development, but at the same time we have values and we have partnerships. And the relationship that we have with Taiwan we treasure, and it's something that we have said very clearly that we are their friend and nobody else should say that we can't be their friend.
New Zealand's Foreign Minister Winston Peters, who was next to Mr. Whips when he made the comments about China, says it wasn't the first time he's heard about the increasing pressure from the superpower, but he refrained from saying if he was concerned about the situation when asked.
Well, I think he gave you an explanation of why he said it, and I can't add to that.
Palau, alongside the Federated States of Micronesia and the Marshall Islands, have what's called Compact of Free Association agreements with the United States. Financial support is given to the three nations, and in return the US is given military access and control. The latest tranche was held up being passed, but were eventually signed into law by US President Joe Biden in March. Prior to it passing, the three compact nations, in a letter penned to the United States Senate, said the delay resulted in undesirable opportunities for economic exploitation by competitive political actors active in the Pacific. Marshall Islands President Hilda Heine says she was a little nervous for a period, but so far it has worked out.
Funding has been flowing under the compact. We still have a number of issues that we're trying to work out that has to do with our federal program and services. So this is one agreement that outstanding agreement that we're still trying to work out. But for the most part, the agreement is being fully implemented.
Palau is Winston Peters' last stop on the North Pacific tour and country number 14 of Pacific Islands Forum nations. He's trying to visit all 17 of the Forum countries, with Kiribati, New Caledonia and French Polynesia still to go. Winston Peters says he should visit them all by mid-October.
On Thursday afternoon, the counting of the first round of the Kiribati election remained incomplete following the polling across the country on Wednesday. As RNZ Pacific's correspondent in Kiribati, Rimon, told Don Wiseman, the collating of information after elections may need modernization.
I think the whole nation spent most of the night staying up doing their own tallies. I think Kiribati needs to really establish a system of having a central result tally that really helps people with it. And so all of the results that were coming around or flying around now, unofficial reports. Of course, these will need to become officials later on in the day. But throughout the night, up into the wee hours of the morning, Radio Kiribati has been broadcasting live. They don't usually do that. They have their own broadcasting times, which is mainly in the morning, noon, and the evenings. But exceptions only on national events like elections itself. And so people were glued last night to their radios, listening to old folk songs and Kiribati songs, and in between the announcements will be made from the radio. And so there will be a popular jingle that goes first, alerting people that a new result is out, and that means all of the electorate confirmed and finalized their counting and has given that information to the radio station. And so that's when the people are really glued up to the radios and with their own papers and tallying, and then we found out each electorate, as the results came out last night. So that's sort of like an activity that took up most of the time last night and up into the early morning hours. And now right into noon on the following day, we're still waiting on the last remaining electorates who are yet to finalize their counts.
How many electorates still to come in?
We're still waiting on that information. There's no website that we go to. So it's all community level effort where we ask each other and they point us to, information available where. But what we're seeing right now is that TUC in South Tarawa, which is the most populous out of all the electorates, is the one that we're stuck on. I'm also hearing that we're stuck with Pesio, which is the other main biggest electorate in South Tarawa, as well as North Tarawa, which is also another electorate in the island of Tarawa that constitutes, I think, one of the largest populations as well, more voters. And I think well into the later in the day when people are having dinner on their table, we would have a clear picture for final result.
Okay, because the information's obviously critical. If there is an election for those who didn't get the 50%, has to be held in just a couple of days' time.
Indeed. So there are only a certain number of electorates who have 3 seats within Parliament. I don't have the figures right now in front of me, Don, but those are mainly the electorates, the 3-seat electorates and the 2-seat electorates, and basically the ones that are going to the second round. And so what we're seeing last night is that at least one of the candidates acquired more than 50% vote, and that meant he's the newly elected member of that island. So if there are 3 seats in an electorate, the top 3 and the top 3 that did not reach the 50% mark will go to the second round of elections. And so that goes as well for the electorates with 2 seats. The ones that acquired more than 50% have been announced last night on Radio Kiribati, and the remaining top 3 or top 2 will contest in the second round of elections on Monday.
That becomes very tough then in South Tarawa, where there are, I think, 22 candidates, a number of seats as well, of course, but a lot of people will be presumably out as a result of that rule.
Well, unfortunately, yes, and I think it's more than 10 candidates running from the capital, right? And this is really the main focus in all Kiribati elections, because that's where most of Kiribati people dwell, and this is the capital. And so I think more than 10 candidates vying for 3 seats. You understand how that works. So with those numbers. So what the preliminary results we're seeing now, which are unofficial results, are done, really show that 3 candidates have stood out with their numbers. And so how we know the numbers throughout the night and throughout this morning, in the early hours of the morning, was that each count that was completed from each village or each ward was somehow managed to go online. And so that information was shared. So in a sense, before the radio, the official radio announcement was made last night, or whenever a result is finalized, people already knew the numbers. So who that candidate won from that island, And so right now the radio is still on and things are just being finalized. But already what we see with the results, especially in South Tarawa, the results are quite, the unofficial results are quite telling, that we have 2 old members are coming back and a new member. So old candidates who were also in Parliament in the last 4 years seem to be leading the race.
In interim results to hand on Thursday after the first round of the Kiribati election, Radio Kiribati reported 22 out of the 23 constituencies had been counted. Among those retaining their seats were the incumbent president, Tanis Maumau, in Onotoa, and the opposition leader, Tesi Eria Lambon, in Abemama. 6 MPs in the last parliament, including 1 cabinet minister, are reported to have lost their seats. As of Thursday afternoon, the counting for 41 out of the 44 seats in the parliament had been completed. So far, in 16 of these seats, no candidate has secured more than 50% of the vote, which is the threshold for an outright win. This means the top 3 polling candidates for each seat will contest in a runoff round on Monday. Senior Pacific journalists are working on a book they hope will capture some of the rich history of the development of media in the region. It will centre around the over 50 years of work by the Pacific Islands News Association, or PINA, which was one of the first Pacific media organisation of its kind set up in the region. The association, which also runs a regional news agency, operates out of Fiji's capital, Suva. Moratula Patela has this report.
The Pacific Islands News Association is the leading organisation representing media professionals in over 20 Pacific Island nations and territories. Its diverse membership includes representatives from radio, television, newspaper, magazines, online publications, media associations and journalism schools. Seasoned Tongan journalist Kalafi Moala, as well as former Australian diplomat and journalist Masali McKinnon, are writing the book about PINA. Mr. Moala says the story of PINA is the story of Pacific media in the last 50 years.
The history of PINA is a history of incredible personalities that were involved in all those decades. Men and women who were there not because they were well paid for the job, but it's because there was a passion to shape the thinking of the people in their societies, a passion to be able to inform correctly and rightly, a passion for development of their nations.
He says the way stories are delivered and told in the Pacific have changed due to technology, the internet and social media.
It's important to tell a time where these media, these journalists of the day was trying to pioneer independence in news reporting, to pioneer freedom of the press. It's something that for some now we take it for granted.
He says that many emerging journalists are not familiar with PINA.
Because the story of PINA is the story of Pacific media in the last 50 years. Basically, Pacific media coming into more of an organized form, where you have media organizations, you have radio, and PINA was a combination of all of those.
Masali McKinnon says the history of PINA is an important one to record. She says the number of Pacific journalists increased as Pacific nations emerged from colonial times in the 60s and 70s.
That was when Pacific Island people were starting to have more senior positions in newsrooms in the Pacific. They'd always been there. Pacific journalists had always been there. I mean, the Fiji Times is 150 years old, for instance. But yes, they were starting to take control of the voice that the audience heard, and that's what we want to cover.
She says the priority for her and Mr. Moala is to interview people involved in PINA in the early days.
We have a short list of 40 people. Actually, one of them sadly died the other day, and that was the legendary former editor of the Fiji Times, Vijendra Kumar, who was in retirement living near Brisbane with his wife and family, and he sadly died I think late last month.
Masali McKinnon says she's now working on securing more funding for the book.
That's Pacific Waves for today. To listen back, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, Mo Nofoha.